friend of mine told me last night that a coyote got hit by the highway, so I called Central Dispatch, told them I was going to pick it up from my Regalia. Let's go. Okay, so I'm here at the side of the highway. Fair warning, this is something difficult to see if you're not used to seeing death. So here it is. You're going to want to bend and you're going to want to perform a funeral rite. So next, I'm going to bring it to my boss and mentor, who's also Indigenous, and we're going to process it and everything to turn it into Regalia. So after moving the coyote, I promptly went home and took a shower, not only for the practicality of getting all the blood off of me and possibly diseases in that blood, but also for spiritual cleansing because I just handled death. And I usually use this bar soap that I got at a powwow. That's all organic, handmade sweetgrass bar soap. So it's the next day now, and I just buried the coyote out in the yard in the snow so it would preserve it. And I'm going to bring it to a professional taxidermist in order to properly prepare it. Now, fair warning, there's blood, and this involves death. I think this is important for the spiritual community to witness, not only to process and come to terms with death, but also to not deny the reality of life and death. So I think the spiritual and the witchcraft community, we get really caught up in the aesthetic and in the love and light. We only want to focus on the positive aspects when difficult aspects also need to be processed and also need to be acknowledged. So in the Indigenous and spiritual community, we believe that something like this is manifested and is meant for you to find by the Creator. So even though it was hit by an accidental car collision on the highway, it was meant for me to find because of things happening in my life that has led up to this. So coincidentally, coyotes are not only significant to Latin American culture, but also to me personally, and have been popping up recently. Alright, so after bringing it to the taxidermist, we got it skinned, and this is what it looks like. They bring it back to you in these bags. So the actual corpse itself is in this bag, and then I have the separate paws in here, and then I asked them to separate the heart and the eyes for me. And then he was kind enough to label them for me as well. So here are the eyes. Fair warning, this is a little grotesque. So there you can see, there's one, and there's two for the eyes. And then here's the heart. So I'm keeping these for a later funeral fire. So that's for a special ritual. And then in here, you got the paws. So these I'm going to freeze dry and then use them later on as protection or for gifts. I haven't quite decided yet, but there's a method of freeze drying this. And so that's what I'm going to do for that. As for the corpse, I'm either going to take this into the forest, let nature do its thing with the maggots and the ravens, and they will take care of all the soft tissue. This usually takes anywhere between like a year or more for it to fully decompose or be eaten away by nature and by other animals in the forest. But essentially it's still got all the soft tissue on it, it's still bloody, and so that's why he's wrapped it up in this bag. So that's essentially what it looks like. It's pretty much like getting meat at the grocery store. I'm essentially just preserving the corpse here until the end of today, when I can get a response to see who wants to claim this corpse and they can process it themselves. There are other ways of handling a corpse. You can put it out into nature, you can let maggots eat it, you can let ravens eat it, but because it's winter and it is cold outside, it's essentially gonna freeze over the winter. So I'm asking the fellow pagan community here in town to see if anyone wants to do anything with this. Otherwise, it's just going into the forest and I'm letting nature reclaim it. So this Thursday, I'm trying to do everything as fast as possible while everything is still fresh. We're gonna have a funeral fire for the coyote spirit. And so it involves using the heart and the eyes to honor the spirit of the animal. But also it's sort of where the Indigenous practice meets Brujería, so it's like a gray area in between Indigenous practices and like witch working or spiritual workings. But people have this misconception of witchcraft being only about hexing, but it's also spiritual workings, which can align with indigenous practices. So essentially, it's going to be like a funeral fire to respect the spirit, but also to ask it to watch over us and guide us. So connecting that coyote spirit to our regalia. And of course, it doesn't represent all indigenous practices, but I know that there are some people that will go to that step to do these sort of spiritual workings where it's bordering on conjuring, but those are also valid. So the traditions that are passed down that aren't as conjuring, that they don't involve any sort of witch practitioner or like a spiritual practitioner, those are valid, but there are certain workings that do involve that and do involve spiritual workings and conjuring spirits. I think what differs here is that we're not exploiting the animal because it was an accident. It wasn't shot. It wasn't illegally or unethically killed. We're trying to honor the spirit of the coyote and trying to gain the wisdom of what it symbolizes, because in Latin America, coyotes are really important and they're significant. In certain cultures, they're sacred animals as well. So when we wear that regalia, we're reminded of the wisdom that we learn about what the coyote symbolizes. So when we wear the regalia, it's a benefit for both sides. So the coyote is being remembered and it's being honored, it's being respected when we wear it. And then for our benefit, we're able to gain the wisdom and remember what that coyote symbolizes. So both parties reach a benefit and they're both equally respecting one another. But for the heavy details, essentially at the funeral fire, you would take a piece of paper and write down like what the coyote symbolizes and how you want it to guide you, like as a spiritual guide. And then you would put that and the eyes inside of the heart, because the heart will symbolize your heart as well, and creating that connection with it. And then the eyes symbolize watching over you like a guardian. And so when you put that in the fire, then it's lifting up that spirit, and honoring that spirit like a funeral fire would, but also creating that connection with you when you wear the pelt and you wear the regalia. And then as for the paws, I'm going to freeze dry them for a long period of time. So you stick it in like a sub-zero freezing temperature, exposed to air, so in that way it properly freeze dries. But I don't know, it'll probably take longer than a year. And then for the skull, I'm going to have to freeze it until springtime when I can properly boil it. So just skinning off the rest of that soft tissue, and then I'm going to have to peel the brain out of the eye socket and everything, and then go through the regular process with bones where you have to degrease it and then use the alcohol and then use the peroxide to whiten it. And then because it's a skull, the teeth are going to fall out, so then after you whiten it, after it dries, you'll glue the teeth back on. So some of it I'm doing this week, some of it I have to wait till springtime when I can go outside and do it. As for the pelt, it's at the tannery, and that's going to take until April, just because it's a long process. But I also have a deer pelt that I'm going to stretch and tan myself in the springtime, because me and my boss / mentor are going to make our own drums. So I'm really excited to make our own hand drums. Hola todos. So I'm out in the forest, and this is something that you should not be doing alone. So I have my friends, they know where I'm at and everything. And I'm keeping to the trails, because if you're out here alone by yourself, there are bears, there are hunters, there are wolves, especially if you're living in rural areas in the Midwest. They will smell this carcass and they will smell the blood and they will come towards that. So you need to be out here as short as possible, as quickly as possible, and get out. Make sure that wherever you're depositing a carcass, it's going to be far away from people, from their homes, just for safety. Come springtime and summertime, it'll be fully deteriorated, either from scavengers or from the maggots and worms that are eating it. Sometimes it can take longer than a year, so just be aware of that. And sometimes it will not be perfect when you come back. So some of it may be eaten away, some of it may be broken just from scavengers and animals eating it. So here I marked a ribbon on this tree to know where the carcass is, and I left it on the other side of this fallen tree so that any animals and scavengers can have their way with it. And nature will reclaim it. So come springtime and summertime, I can come harvest the bones. Hopefully it'll be fully decomposed by then, but sometimes it can take longer. Now, in my spirituality, my tradition, and my practice, I have a little curanderismo box. So this is for Indigenous and Latin American practices because we are indigenous to the Americas. So in here I have things like tobacco, sage, matches, and a tiny abalone shell. So we're going to lay some tobacco on this animal, pay it some respects, and later we're going to have a funeral fire. So tonight's the funeral fire, and I placed a spirit plate for the animal to offer up some food for it. And I feel like since human hands accidentally killed it, I feel it's only right for human hands to return it.
When the fire does that, it's really roaring now. You hear it crackling and everything. Just listen to it crackle.
Now again, this is showing the gray area between Indigenous and Brujería, or witch workings. So this isn't representative of everyone who is Indigenous or everyone who does Brujería, but here you can see I'm inserting some of my own essence, my hair, nails, into the heart to link the heart of the coyote to my own heart. So when I wear the regalia, I'll be reminded of what the coyote represents and what it means, so that the spirit guide can help guide me in my path. That's what the heart represents. The eyes represent the coyote watching over you like a guardian spirit. So we're going to take both of them and put it into the funeral fire as I'm saying a prayer. These types of spiritual workings are about mutual respect. So here I'm giving my energy, my spirit, and my respect to the animal. Then as we tended to the fire the rest of the night, I felt that something had been lifted, that the spirit of the coyote had been given its proper respects. Remember, just because we're human doesn't mean that we're better than other creatures. We can gain so much wisdom from other creatures as long as we respect them. Ashe, aho. Chimigwech, wisagi maingan.